Let Us Be Muslims by Sayyid Abul Mawdudi, edited by the late brother Khurram Murad. May their souls be blessed by Allah. Chapter 11. Difference between Deen and Sharia. Brothers in Islam, by talking of Islam, we often hear and use two particular words. One is Deen and the other is Sharia. But very few understand the true meaning of Deen and Sharia. Not only the illiterate, but even reasonably educated people and many religious scholars too do not fully grasp the important distinction between the two concepts. Due to this ignorance, Deen and Sharia are often confused with each other, creating serious malaises. Meaning of Deen. The word Deen is used in several meanings. The first is sovereignty, power, lordship, kingship, or rulership. The second is the opposite of this, that is, submission, obedience, service, or slavery. The third is to bring to account, to judge, or to dispense reward and punishment for action. All those three uses are found in the Quran. Allah says, the only true deen in the sight of Allah is man's self-surrender to Him. Surah Al-Imran, Ayat 90. Here, deen is that way of life in which we recognize Allah alone as the possessor of all power and majesty and surrender ourselves to Him. We must not abase or humble ourselves before anybody save Him. We must regard Allah as Master, Lord, and Sovereign. We must not be slaves or servants to anybody but Him. We must accept only Allah as the Lord of reward and punishment. We should covet no reward, fear no punishment except His. Islam is the name of this deen. False deen arises when you ascribe real powers to anyone besides Allah, when you take anyone as a real ruler and master, as a dispenser of real reward and punishment, when you bow your heads before Him in humility, when you serve Him and obey His orders, when you covet His reward and fear His punishment more than Allah. This kind of deen Allah never accepts because it is totally contrary to reality. No other being in the whole universe except God possesses any power and might, nor does anybody else sovereignty and kingship exist. We have not been created to be servants and slaves of anyone or anything but God, nor is there anyone else except that real master who can judge us and award reward and punishment. In many places in the Quran, these facts have been explained. And whoso seeks a deen other than Islam will not be accepted from him. Surah Al-Imran, Ayat 85. Thus, anyone who disregards the sovereignty and kingship of God, acknowledges someone else as his master and ruler, becomes his servant and slave, and considers anyone as a dispenser of reward and punishment in his own right, will never have his deen or conduct accepted by God, because they were not enjoying anything but that they should serve God, making submission exclusively His, turning away from all false God. Surah Al-Bayyinah, Ayat 5. God has not created human beings to serve anyone except Himself. It is therefore incumbent on them to turn away from all false gods and reserve their submission or their true deen for Allah alone. They should single-mindedly devote themselves to His service and consider themselves as being accountable only to Him. What? Do they seek a deen other than God's? Whereas unto him surrenders whatever is in the heavens and on the earth, willingly or unwillingly, and unto him all must return. Surah Ali Imran, ayat 83. How can we human beings incline to be servants and to submit to someone other than God, when all other things on earth and in the heavens are slave and obedient servants of God alone, accounting for their deeds to no other authority than God? Does man want to adopt a deviant way for himself, some kind of independent and autonomous existence in defiance of the entire universe? Here it is, who has sent forth his messenger with the guidance and the way of truth, so that he makes it prevail over all ways, however much mushriks who take God beside God may dislike it. Surah Al-Tawbah, ayat 33. Allah has sent his messenger with a true deen for the purpose of ending the sovereignty of all false gods and granting us immense freedom, so that we live as servants of none but the Lord of the universe, no matter how much the idolaters and polytheists may dislike or oppose such a cause. And fight them until there is no rebellion against God, and all submission is to God alone. Surah Al-Anfal, ayat 39. The lesson is clear. We must fight until the sovereignty of all beings other than Allah is brought to an end, until only the law of God rules in the world, until the sovereignty of God alone is acknowledged, until we serve only Him. Thus, these three meanings of Deen stands out. Firstly, to acknowledge God as Lord, Master and Ruler. Secondly, to obey and serve only Him. And thirdly, to be accountable to Him, to fear only His punishment, and to covet only His reward. Deen also includes obedience to God's messenger, for the commandments of God have been given to human beings through His book and His messengers. Children of Adams, if there should come to you messengers from among you who convey my revelation unto you, then whoever refrains from evil and lives rightly, no fear shall be on them, and neither shall they sorrow. Surah Al-A'raf, ayat 35. No individual receives Allah's commandment directly. Hence, whoever acknowledges Allah as rulers can be accepted as obedient to Him only when he becomes obedient to His messengers and lives by the guidance received through them. Deen consists of these fundamental principles. Meaning of Sharia. We now turn to the Sharia. The meaning of the Sharia is way and path. You enter Deen when you accept God as your sovereign, accept to live in service to Him, accept that the messenger holds authority on his behalf, and accept that the book has been sent by him. The ways in which you then have to serve God and the path you have to travel along in order to obey Him is called the Sharia. This way or path you have been given by God through His messenger. It is He who teaches you how to worship the Master, how to make your bodies and hearts clean, what is righteous and piety, and how to discharge right, how to undertake transactions and dealing with our fellow beings, indeed, how to lead our entire life. Nature of differences. The key difference between Deen and Sharia is this. While Deen always was, has been, and still is one and the same, many Sharia were revealed. Some were subsequently cancelled or changed, but without changing the Deen. The Deen of Nuh was the same as that of Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, Shu'aib, Hud, Saleh, and Muhammad, peace be on them. But the Sharia varies from each other to some extent. The prescribed ways of performing the prayers and observe the fast were different. Injunction about halal, permissible, and the haram, forbidden, rules of cleanliness, and codes of marriages, divorce, and inheritance also differed. In spite of this, all were Muslims, the followers of Nuh, Ibrahim, Isa, or Musa, and we too are all Muslims, because Deen is one and the same for all. This shows that Deen is unaffected by differences in the regulation and laws of the Sharia. Deen remains the same through precise details of following, though precise details of following it differs. An example will illustrate the difference between Deen and Sharia. Suppose a master has many servants. If some of them do not acknowledge him as their master, nor consider his orders worthy of obedience, they cannot be considered servants at all. But those who acknowledge him as their master, consider it their duty to obey him, clearly belong to the category of servants. The duties they perform and the way they serve him may be different, but they still remain his true servants. If the master has shown one servant one way to serve him and a different way to another, no one has any right to claim that he alone is a rightful servant and that the others are not. Similarly, if one servant understands his master's will in one way and another servant in another way, and both try to do his will as understood by them, then both are equally good. Both are equally good servants. Quite possibly, one may err in understanding the meaning of a particular directive, but as long as he does not refuse to obey it, no one has a right to brand him as disobedient or excommunicate him. Understand clearly that this difference between Deen and Sharia. Before the Prophet's blessing and peace be on him, Allah sent various Shariahs through various prophets. One mode of service was ordained through one prophet and another through another prophet. Those who served the Master in these different ways were all Muslims. Then, when the Prophet came, blessing and peace be on him, the Master declared, "Now we abrogate all the previous codes. From now on, whoever wants to serve us must follow the code which we are giving through our last messenger." From then on, no servant has the right to serve according to the previous codes. If he does not accept the new code and continue to follow the old, he is in fact obeying his own dictates, nor those of the master. Such a person can no longer be legitimately called a servant. He becomes, in religious language, a kafir. Juristic differences between Muslims. The first part of the example applies to those who claim to follow the earlier prophets. The second part applies to the followers of the Prophet Muhammad, blessing and peace be on him. Anyone who believes that the Sharia given by him has been sent down by Allah and therefore must be followed is a Muslim. One person may understand the injunctions of the Sharia in one way and another person in another way, and both may follow them according to their particular understanding. However widely they may differ, both will be able to call themselves servants, for both will be acting in the consciousness that they are doing their master's bidding. In such a case, what right has one servant to say that he alone is a genuine servant while the other is not? The most he can argue is that he has understood the correct meaning of his master's order while the other has not. But this does not give him the authority to expel the latter from the fold of servants, that is, call him a kafir. Anyone who does display such temerity assumes, as it were, the status of the master. He would seem to be saying, just as it is compulsory for you to obey the master's order, so also it is compulsory for you to accept my way of understanding. If you fail to do that, I shall with my own power dismiss you from the master's service. For this very reason, the Prophet, blessing and peace be on him, said, whomsoever unjustly brands a Muslim as kafir, his verdict will rebound on him. Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. For God has made the submission to his guidance the test of whether or not one is a Muslim. A person who insists upon such submission to his own interpretation and judgment and assumes such power of dismissal from himself, irrespective of whether God himself dismisses someone or not, is in fact saying that God alone is not God, but that he himself is also a small God. Anyone who makes such a presumptuous assertion runs the danger of becoming a kafir, irrespective of whether or not the other Muslim has in fact acted as a kafir. Brothers, I hope you now fully understand the important difference between Deen and Sharia, and also comprehend the fact that differences in the modes of serving God do not mean deviation from Deen. Of course, a person who follows a particular course must genuinely know and believe that God and the Messenger have actually enjoined him to do what he is doing, and in support of his action, he should produce authentic evidence from the Book of God or the Sunnah of his Messenger. Ignoring the nature of differences. Consider now what great harm is being caused to Muslims by not observing these differences between Deen and Sharia. There are several ways of performing prayers among Muslims. We may rest our hand on our chest, or we may place them on our navels. We may recite Al-Fatiha while praying behind the Imam, or we may not. We may utter an Amin loudly or quietly. Each of us will be following his respective method in full consciousness of the fact that it was followed by the Prophet, blessing and peace be on him, and that we have the evidence to support this claim. Each of us is therefore equally a follower of the Prophet. But some people take these issues of detail in Sharia as fundamental issues of Deen itself. They have therefore established their own separate congregation and their own mosque. They have abused each other, possibly driven their opponents from mosque, fought legal battles, and split the Prophet's Ummah into various sects. When even this was not enough to satisfy them, they started on the slightest of pretexts, labeling each other as kafir, sinners, and heretics. They are not happy unless they impose their understanding on everyone else. The different schools, the mazhab of Hanafi, Shafi'i, Al-Hadith, and so on, which you see among Muslims, all acknowledge the Quran and Hadith as their final authority and derive injunction from them according to their own understanding. It may be that one school's understanding is correct and another's is incorrect. I myself am a follower of one of these schools and argue with those who are opposed to it in order to explain to them what is correct in my view and prove wrong what I consider to be wrong. But it is one thing for somebody's understanding to be wrong, and it is quite another to expel him from Islam. Every Muslim has the right to follow the Sharia according to his understanding. If 10 Muslims follow 10 different methods, all of them are surely Muslims as long as they believe that they submit to the law of God. They constitute one ummah, and there is no reason for them to form separate sects. Only those who do not understand this point split the ummah into different factions for trivial reasons. Set apart their congregations and mosques, prevent intermarriages and social relations, and organize the group as if each one is an ummah by itself. Sectarianism. It is impossible to overestimate the harm caused by Muslims by this sectarianism. On the face of it, Muslims are one ummah. In India alone today, there are about 80 million of them. If such a big community were really united and worked together to make Islam's guidance supreme, who in the world would have the courage to oppose it? But sectarianism has led this ummah to be split into hundreds of factions, their heart sundered from each other. They are incapable of uniting even at times of the gravest crisis. A Muslim belonging to one faction is often more prejudiced against a Muslim belonging to another faction than against a Christian or a Jew. At times, members of one Muslim faction have gone to the extent of siding with unbelievers to humiliate a member of another Muslim faction. You should not therefore be surprised to see Muslims living in servitude to others. This is what they have earned by their actions. Upon them has descended that punishment which Allah has warned them of. He will divide you in sects and make you taste the violence of one another. Surah Al-An'am, ayat 65. Dissension, cutting each other's throat, subjugation to tyranny and oppression, all these are forms of God's punishment visited upon Muslims of today throughout the world. This punishment is very evident in the Punjab today. Here, sectarian strife is very widespread. Consequently, in spite of your numerical majority, you are powerless. If you want to further your well-being, you must demolish these sectarian barriers, live as brothers one unto another, and become one united ummah. There is no basis whatsoever in God's Sharia to make Shia, Sunni, Hanafi, Al-Hadith, Deobandi, Baralvi, and so on and so forth into separate ummah. These ummahs are the product of ignorance. Allah made us only one ummah, the ummah Muslimah. Subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim.